particularly happy to accept the invitation to interview Dr. Robert Groves, the head of the U.S. Census Bureau, for ARF's Audience Measurement 5.0. A couple of key points that impressed me, the size of the undertaking. I asked him at one point what it was like to come from being a professor of research and media at the University of Michigan, where he probably had, I don't know, at most 100 or 200 students, to overseeing a group that included 600,000 employees and enumerators, 47 million door-to-door enumerators for the survey, for the census survey. And he talked about how it was an adjustment. Of course, there was a huge apparatus at work, and the machine was going before he got there. But he summed it up by talking to a census director from Canada who told him the best way of coping was just to remain afraid through the whole process. He seemed anything but afraid. He seemed very confident and unflappable, and all the feedback I've gotten from former students confirms that. So I think, and more importantly, he showed a lot of empirical data of the census itself. So interestingly enough, here's a person who's an expert at measuring things. So as he was measuring the United States population, he was also measuring his performance in measuring the United States population, which was fascinating in a sense all on its own. One thing that struck me, I asked him a question. He mentioned most people use the census and they're not aware of the numbers. It's being fed to them in different ways in different places all the time. When I use census numbers, I always try to give it as a source because it's dependable and validating. But many times the way it filters down through everything from product placements to things that they'll hear on the job, at home, on a TV show, they have no idea that that's where this is coming from. So I asked him if the U.S. Census had a branding problem. I thought it was an appropriate audience for that. And he agreed that it did, but he doesn't see it particularly as his job to build the census brand, since it's mandated in the Constitution and the support for the government seems unwavering. Having said that, well, there are two parts to the last thing I'll say, but I asked him about, of course, new mainstream effects. Just yesterday there was a piece in Advertising Age talking about the new majority. There's been a lot of anticipation about this, and of course, as he pointed out, we live in an age where numbers, statistics, our ability to measure and validate things has become more and more important. The importance of consumer economies has grown. It's a bigger part of the GNP than ever. And our need to incorporate that, not just in the populations, the way they work in marketing and advertising, but as political and social entities and cultural entities. These things have come together. There's a confluence. And so this is also, the census has become a tool of empowerment for these groups. And he agreed very much that was a fact and that it was a changing face of America. And he thought one of the most interesting and surprising takeaways, at least to some people, would be the extent to which the dispersion of immigrants and people of color and different ethnic groups has moved far beyond the big cities, far beyond the so-called melting pot states, but into communities in Iowa, in Michigan, and so forth. And he gives a story of a town, I can't remember the name of it now, a small town in North Carolina where the local football star is among who probably speaks with a southern accent. Of course, he'll probably, the football he'll be playing might be soccer by the time this story surfaces. But these are all, demographic changes that are going on. And some people, one of the questions afterward was, what to do with these naysayers, the people who are opposed to this. I gave an example of giving a talk in Indiana, and an older lady raised her hand and said, I discussed the changing demographics, the growing power of so-called minority consumers, and she raised her hand and she said, excuse me, how do we stop this? So, people laugh, but it was a knowing laugh. People are aware that there are people who would love to be able to stop this, but there is no way to stop it. And in fact, Dr. Groves also pointed out they've had a number of assaults and even murders on census enumerators in different places from people, and I'm sure the causes are wide-ranging, but there was also definitely a vocal political group that tried to portray the census as unconstitutional, which is absurd because it's actually in the Constitution. And I pointed out that the sort of allergic reaction to government on the far right was hurting the GOP because their own constituents were refusing to be counted. That affects representation in the Congress. So they're really shooting themselves in the foot, if not the mouth. And Karl Rove, I remember, actually went on television to try to rally the right-wing troops to respond to the census because it was actually counterproductive for them to boycott it. I think those are the main takeaways. You know, he's a very warm and interesting person. Seems very engaged and open to potentially in the future using different kinds of media. One thing I thought was significant was the biggest kind of red flag that went off during the course of the enumeration phase was 18 to 24-year-olds were dropping out. They were not being reached. They did not, much more so than ethnic groups or even lower income. It was the young who felt disengaged. They thought it was for grown-ups, not for them. And what they did was they stepped up their advertising and outreach in new media, and that seemed to close the gap. So I thought that was a really powerful statement for the importance of that form of media for reaching that particular group. Older people, particularly of different ethnic groups, print, in-language print, small publications in everything from Filipino to Cambodian to Spanish and Russian and Polish. That was the way to reach older immigrants, and you know that's really the world we live in. You have to target your audience, who your customers are, who you're trying to reach, and then figure out the best mix to get to them, whether you're the census or a company just starting out.